And we wait. All right. You're live. Hello, everyone out there on the interweb. Welcome to the SwiftKick Show. My name is Kevin Griffin, and I am graciously joined by Miss Emily Freeman. How are you today, Emily?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Awesome. Well, we're trying a slightly new format today, so I'm going to run through it, and eventually we'll get to the really good material, which is Emily. But
you're kind.
We'll give people a chance to kind of filter into the room as we go. So let me kick off my. I had this all rehearsed and planned out. I clicked that button, then this button, and then that button, and it would all just work. Mm-hmm. And of course, I'm not doing any of that right now.
That's how it always goes.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome to the SwiftKick Show. Just a little bit about SwiftKick. We are a consulting company based out of Chesapeake, Virginia. We also do a lot in the training space as well. And our mission in life is just to make developers better than they were the day before. So if that means coming to you with webinars like this that just provide great free information from experts around the world like Emily, or training courses or in-person training or virtual training. We kind of cover it all. So we would love to help you with any of your training needs in the future. We're on the social, and we want you to be on the social with us. And there's a lot of ways to connect. Most importantly, Twitter and LinkedIn are our big places where we connect with folks. So please give us a follow on either of those locations. And this video will eventually end up on our YouTube channel, where we have other great webinars that you can go back and look at. So if you just go to YouTube and search for SwiftKick, you'll find us. I would put a URL, but we don't quite have 100 subscribers yet. So I have that really weird youtube.com/C0F89GQ. And that's not something you want to put on the slide. So if you don't mind, go to YouTube, search for us, and give us a subscribe. Because as soon as I get 100 subscribers on that channel, we'll get a real URL. We're also on the Facebook or the Facegram, whatever you want to call it. You can go there as well. And we try to be everywhere. Our show series continues every 2 weeks, just about, and we have some great topics coming up for you. Next show is in 2 weeks, and it's not a special guest; it's just me. And I'm going to be talking about a topic that I've talked a lot about in the past, called SignalR. And there's some new revisions for people out there in the .NET space to learn about. After that, we have a very good friend of mine. And Emily, I know you know Linda from the past, but Linda Nichols will be joining us, and it's on Valentine's Day. So don't just come by yourself, bring your significant other as well. Share the moment. And I don't know what Linda's going to talk about, because Linda said she was cooking up something special just for us, and I have no idea what that is. After that, on February 28th, Mr. Josh Carlisle. Josh comes to us from Raleigh, North Carolina, and he's going to be talking about Azure Functions. So if you're doing anything in serverless or on AWS with Lambda, Azure Functions is just the Microsoft version of that sort of stuff. And then after Josh, we have Mr. Ankur Kalra. I always have trouble pronouncing his name. Again, I don't know what Ankur is talking about. I need to ping him and find out what that's going to be. But
this is awesome.
But you came here today to not see me, to not hear about what we're talking about next week or the week after that. You're here to see Miss Emily Freeman. And before we get to Emily, I want to have a chat with you, Emily, and get to know you a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because it's a pretty good chance that our audience might have never seen you in person, maybe never have heard of you until this point. So we want to learn a little bit more about Emily. So the first obvious question is, Emily, what do you do here? Who do you work for, and what do you do?
I am a developer advocate for Kickbox. We're an email verification startup out of Dallas, but I work out of Denver, the best city in the world. And basically, email verification, for us, it means verifying that a user is a real person using their email address. And so we can. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're really good at it. And so you can clean up your lists, and we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later. This is especially important for people in the marketing space, like content marketing, email marketing, making sure that your lists are filled with people who are real and who want to see and receive your emails. And we're about to launch a really cool addition to our on sign-up offering. So making sure that the person who's signing up for your service is an actual person right then, like without anything. That's
fantastic, especially if you run a service, if you have free trials or anything like that. It's really useful to know. I know this from my standpoint. It's like, all right, is the email you're giving me a real email address?
Yeah.
Too many times we've had in our SaaS where someone puts in a mailinator, some sort of throwaway email address. And we had people that tried to work the system with our free trials. Like, if I sign up 10 times with 10 different mailinator addresses, I can get basically everything I need without paying you a dime.
Yeah.
And it would have been insanely useful to go, hey, try again.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The other thing, I had a friend, they launched a startup and it was going really well. And then all of a sudden, like their signups spike up, and it was like a very, Silicon Valley kind of thing. They're suddenly getting 10,000 signups a day. And it's like, oh, we've hit the jackpot.
Yep.
All bots.
All bots.
And it's heartbreaking.
It's especially bad. Like, so for SwiftKick, I run the mailing list that all the good people watching are now on. And I promise I won't spam you. But when I send out emails and when I have contacts, I basically have to pay for every couple hundred or 1,000 people on my list. So if I go over a threshold, I have to pay more. And if 50% of my list are all bots or non-people, well, I would like to know that in advance and just clean them out of the list so I don't have to pay for contacts I don't necessarily have.
Yeah. So, it's even worse if those bots try and buy things off your startup with fraudulent credit cards.
I didn't even think about that, but that does sound bad.
Yeah, it can get really bad really fast.
Now, you're a developer advocate. So what exactly is a developer advocate?
I know. I get this question all the time, and it's a solid question, right? So developer advocacy, or it's sometimes referred to as developer evangelism, it's relatively new. I think, Twilio was one of the first to kind of do it. And it really was born out of APIs. So APIs are, just about a decade old. And so it's like you have this situation where you have developers suddenly using your product. And so you need someone technical who has a previous engineering experience and can speak tech to people, and still kind of help them get on the API and make sure, I fulfill a number of roles in the company. One of them is to get people excited about our product. And I love that because I do work for a vendor and we have a really good product. And then two is just to work with our product department and make sure that the features and bugs that you all see and the features that you want to see are on our pipeline, and on our roadmap for the future.
Awesome. Yeah, I remember years and years ago, I was a developer evangelist, and it was a slightly different job to have back then than it is now. I love the term advocate. I think it's more true to the nature of the position, because we see advocates popping up. Every big company has advocates now, and it's the term evangelist. The problem I had with the term evangelist was it was always tied to a marketing or sales position. Yes. And it wasn't, the goal couldn't be win hearts and minds. It had to be, did you sell a license?
Yeah.
And that's kind of why evangelism had a spike. It peaked, and then all of a sudden everyone got laid off or they went to different places because the expectation was not what it should have been.
And no developer advocate is tied to sales. We fight that tooth and nail because our role is just to say this is what we do well. This is what I think you could use us for. And if you don't like us, cool.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't care.
Now you're at Kickbox right now, but I'd love to learn a little bit more about your origin story. How did you get because you haven't always been a developer or in the developer space. So how did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, so that's verbose, to say the least. Before I was an advocate for Kickbox, I worked for a small company here in Denver. I was a backend developer writing APIs and services in Java for a media asset management company, which is just a fancy way of saying we handled large video files for studios and licensing and all that. And before that, I went to the Turing School, which is here in Denver. It's a code school. In my opinion, it's the best code school there is. It's one of the longer programs. It's 7 months. So learned Ruby, Rails, JavaScript, and then got thrown into Java, which is like a whole different other animal. But long before that, I was a writer, specifically a ghostwriter. So I wrote a lot of blogs and articles for personalities and entrepreneurs who just don't have time to write for themselves. And none of them write for themselves.
No, they
just
don't.
so you know.
Yeah.
It's all someone like me.
Time.
Exactly. It's so true.
Well, fantastic. So just a couple more questions. So outside of just tech and your day job, what hobbies do you have?
So my big hobby, and actually this is like so relevant because I was a competitive powerlifter. I love powerlifting.
Yep. I used to when I was younger.
Nice. It's great. Yep. It's a great sport.
Yep.
And I got pretty good. I have a 265 deadlift, which I'm proud of.
Nice.
Yeah. And then, between having my daughter, changing careers, traveling nonstop for this job, I'm like, I just have fallen out of it and not been able to hold on to a program. So I decided that I was just going to go back to 45 pounds, go back to the barbell, do everything, do a beginner's program from the start. Like I'm a total beginner, which hurts my ego, Kevin.
I know what you mean. Yep.
Oh, it's hard. But I think it's the best thing. And it's just really nice to get back in the gym. So that's my 2018. It's such a cliche New Year's resolution, but here I am.
Your 2018 resolution is slightly different than most people's, though, where most people's is, I just need to get into a gym. You're like, I need to deadlift 265 pounds. And it's a slightly different goal altogether.
Yeah.
But I when I was much younger, I used to do powerlifting. And it was by accident.
Really?
Because I was just trying to go to a gym on a regular basis, and my now brother-in-law, he was going to a gym, so I started going as his workout buddy. Well, it turns out he worked out with bodybuilders and powerlifters.
Nice.
And it was fascinating because I would get on a bench and just myself would just not put that much weight on. But you get a powerlifter coming in and we go, no, you can do more than that.
I know.
All right. Okay, so and I forgot how much we were benching and we were deadlifting. I wasn't a big fan of deadlifting because I have a bad back.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like the one exercise you can do where just the wrong angle, you're out for weeks. So I try not to do it too often. But yeah, it's so much fun to just and then I know what you mean. We had kids. I got married, had kids, got another job, and going to the gym now, it's like just the bar. One. Take a break.
But I will say 2 little notes, and then I'm going to plug something. If anyone's interested in weightlifting and specifically powerlifting, the people involved in powerlifting are some of the nicest people you will ever meet. They are huge and they are scary looking, and you're like, your mother would have said never get in an elevator with one of these people. But they're amazing, and they're just like so kind, and they will sit there and cheer you on no matter what you're lifting. It's one of the coolest communities I've ever been a part of. And then 2, me and a few friends do a weightlifting Wednesday Twitter hour. So from, Wednesdays, 8 p.m. Mountain Time. So what is that, 10 p.m. Eastern. We all get on, and it's under the hashtag Weightlifting Wednesdays, and we just talk about weightlifting. You can ask any kind of question, and a bunch of us have different hobbies within the weightlifting community. So you can get a bunch of resources. It's kind of fun.
That's awesome. All right. So Weightlifting Wednesdays. We'll try to remember that.
Okay, cool.
All right. So let's come back to technology just for a moment. What's your tech stack of choice look like? So at Turing School, you said you learned Ruby, JavaScript, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Is that what you're still doing a lot of?
Right now, I'm actually doing a lot more JavaScript than I ever have before, which is interesting. Here's another plug. I'm running JavaScript January. It's something I came up with in November. I was sitting at a JavaScript conference, and I was about to write for SysAdvent, which is 25 articles about system administration and DevOps, which my article is pretty funny there, so you should go check that out. It's a DevOps Christmas carol. It took me forever. It's hilarious.
Oh my gosh, okay. Yeah. We'll get a link to that. We'll send it out to everyone.
Yeah, but I was like, we should have this for JavaScript, JavaScript January. So yeah, it's 31 articles about all things JavaScript, front end, back end. Some of them are highly technical, some of them are not. It's really cool, so check that out. But yeah, doing a lot more JavaScript, and then Java, writing SDKs and all sorts of languages.
Cool.
Yeah.
So the grand scheme of technology out there, what technology do you think you're the most excited about? Or so something you're either doing or not doing. What excites you the most right now?
I'm going to sidestep this because it's not necessarily a technology that excites me, but it's where the industry is headed, and it's how we're approaching the technology. I think some of the cultural changes we're seeing on teams and just in the industry as a whole is really exciting. I do a lot of work with DevOps, and it's just like engineers are doing things and playing roles on teams that we never have before. And we're showing that we have other skills. We're not just like nerds in the dark room or the closet. They can kind of like just pump out code, We're managing features. We're acting like PMs and product owners. And so I'm excited about us owning that kind of thing and changing the way people think about us.
That's awesome. Yeah. All right, cool.
I want to ask about Revolution Conf. If we can talk about that.
Revolution Conf. So I guess I could plug my own conference, right?
Please do. It's a great conference.
So it's a great conference. It's where I met Emily.
That's true.
Very, very long time ago. But Revolution Conf is a technology agnostic conference that we hold in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Our dates this year are May 17th and 18th. And Emily's been kind enough to join us for the past 2 years, and I'm working on getting her to submit for the third year. So we need to work on that if you haven't. But our call for speakers is currently open. So if there's anyone out there who has been thinking about speaking and just wanted something to get their feet wet, we cover all speaker expenses. So if you need a hotel, you need a flight, you need a train, automobile, whatever, we'll help you out. We just want you to come and share your knowledge with us. And the tickets are also on sale, so you can go to tickets.revolutionconf.com and just buy a ticket. So if you just want to come meet everyone, you can do that. You don't have to speak. But that's a great time to plug. And I'll make sure that everyone out there knows about Revolution Conf.
Yes, it's right on the beach. Like, it's one of the best conferences because you go on the beach. It's fantastic. And
we're doing our luau again this year.
Yes.
Our luau was the big hit of the conference because we were having barbecue and good stuff out on the beach on a warm summer night. It was, fantastic.
Awesome.
All righty. Well, I am, I think that's good. Thank you so much for answering my questions. I had a lot more just in case. I thought they were going to be short answers, but they were great answers.
I'm a talker.
So everyone out there who's watching, you have Q&A on the right side of your screen. Feel free to use it. As Emily goes through her talk, if you have questions, just feel free to ask. And as she allows breaks in between her talk, I'll jump in and ask your questions for you. If not, we'll just save them all for the end. But with that, Emily, I'm just going to turn it over to you and do what you do best.
Awesome.
All right.
Yeah, so I'm excited to talk to you about IP and SMTP today, basically how email works from a sending perspective. So you type in the to fields who you're going to send an email to, and then it delivers to their inbox what kind of happened along that process. As we talked about earlier, my name is Emily Freeman. I'm a developer advocate for Kickbox, email verification. It seems like there's always a new blog, like sensationally telling us that email is dead, it's on its way out, it's going to be replaced by SMS or another messaging service. So I travel a lot for this gig, doing conference talks. And at airports, I like to make friends. I'm one of the people that like annoys other passengers. So I was sitting at this airport bar, and this man sits next to me, and I introduce myself, and he says he works for an SMS startup. I'm like, okay, cool, nice. He's like, what do you do? I'm like, email verification. He's like, oh. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, that's not good. Email's gone. It'll be replaced. And so this seems to be the like generic zeitgeist, but it turns out email just isn't going anywhere. Year over year, it continues to grow. It continues to be one of the best ways that marketers and companies can reach out to their consumers. And it's one of the best performing marketing channels from an ROI perspective. It's fairly cheap to stay in contact with people, and email marketing works, promotional marketing works. I would argue that learning how email works from a little bit of a technical perspective, even at a high level, is a really good use of your time. From a more marketing perspective, you're gonna be able to protect yourself, your company's reputation, making sure those emails actually make it to your consumers and customers' inboxes. But from a technical perspective, if you're a nerd like me, it's pretty cool to think about how email evolved and where it comes from. It's actually one of the oldest protocols on the internet. And it hasn't really evolved that much. So that's interesting too. I like to think about where email is going next, how we're going to kind of change things and see how this tech evolves. So let's pretend we're shipping a cat, right? I don't know why you'd ship a cat. Maybe you want PETA to harass you on Twitter. But either way, if you're shipping a package, whether it's a cat or not, the most of the risk and the danger from things and the complications from things are going to come in the shipping of that. So you want to make sure that you put your cat in a sturdy box. You're going to need to put some breathing holes, figure out that water situation. But you're also going to have to figure out, okay, I need the box to be sturdy. I need that return address to be written clearly. And I need to make sure that the mailman knows where the package is going. And email is pretty similar, right? A lot of the risk and complexity comes from the actual packaging and sending of the email. So what you can expect from today, first, have fun. I don't want this to be super low level, deep dive into tech. I'm going to talk about some technical things, and there'll be a lot of acronyms. I'm going to do my best to explain those and make sure that it's still high level and fun. I certainly don't want to sit here and make your eyes gloss over. So yeah, I've broken it up into 3 sections. We've got how SMTP works, and SMTP stands for Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. This is simply an acronym that means how an email is sent. It's just, think of it like a recipe or an algorithm for how an email gets from one inbox to another. Then we're going to look at the message contents, and not necessarily, the actual message of an email, like hi mom, whatever, but more like from a broader perspective, looking at those headers of an email message and how they help us package and transfer email over the internet. Finally, we're going to look at deliverability and reputation. And this will be, summarized as you shouldn't be a spammy schmuck. But outside of that, we're going to look into what goes into deliverability and reputation. There's a lot of factors that affect how much email is sent and how reliable you are as a sender. I'm going to stop after every section and allow for questions. So I'm assuming Kevin will come back on at that point and let me know if anyone asks anything. But if we're going along and you have a question come up, just throw it in chat, and I'm happy to pause and answer it as we go. Okay, so here we go. SMTP. When it comes to email, the thing that makes sending happen is SMTP. So you might be using an email service provider. This is usually shortened to ESP. And these are people like SendGrid or MailChimp. There's a dozen or so that you can use to send email, in addition to your typical like Gmail or Yahoo regular accounts. So you might be using an email service provider, or if you're not doing that and you're on the more technical side, you could be calling an HTTP API endpoint to send your email. But somewhere along the line, your message will be sent over SMTP. That is how it works at the lowest level. So no matter how many abstractions you kind of layer on top of that, SMTP is the heart of how email is transferred. There's an important point to note here. SMTP only transfers the mail. It does not define the content. Much like the Postal Service will only look at the envelope. It doesn't read your letters. We're not in the USSR. No one's, steaming open your envelopes. Instead, you simply look at the return address and the address and deliver it based off of that. Where you start to see receiving is when you are like looking at acronyms like POP3 or IMAP. I'm not going to get into any of that today. I'm only going to focus on deliverability and what you should be concerned with as a sender. So we'll start with transport and then move on to how content is defined. For the most part, SMTP libraries and email service providers, they abstract the need to interact directly with SMTP servers. But SMTP is an incredibly human readable protocol. And it's part of TCP IP. There's a lot of acronyms on that page right now, so don't freak. TCP IP is basically just your transmission control protocol and internet protocol. So when you hear things like IP address, that's that internet protocol. This is the heart of how the internet works. These are all the protocols and recipes for how things are transferred over the internet. As I was saying earlier, it's incredibly human readable, which is actually really nice. Once you make a TCP connection to an SMTP server, there is a conversation back and forth between you, the client, and the server. And unlike a protocol like HTTP, where there's usually just one request and one response per connection, with SMTP, it stays open. And so you can have a connection back and forth within that one conversation in a way. The nice thing about SMTP is that it's simple enough to interact with by manually typing commands into your console or terminal. So we're going to look at this a little bit. If you're untechnical, don't freak about this. This is not too complicated. You can actually connect to a service like Gmail from your console using SMTP. So you're going to type this into your terminal and hit enter. And then you're going to get a lot back, okay? So you see what we just put in there. And then you're going to get a certificate. You're going to get some other stuff, an SSL handshake. And then finally, you're going to end up with this 220 response with the smtp.gmail.com and then ESMTP. And the 220 response is simply saying that it is good. I think it means domain server ready. And then so in this case, Gmail's server is ready to have a conversation. And then that ESMTP, it stands for extended SMTP. And it simply means that that server is capable of doing a little bit more than some others. So I want you to think about SMTP messages as being an envelope. There's contents inside that hopefully no one sees, right? And then there's the publicly viewable part, and that's what servers use to route a message. On an envelope, the return address identifies the sender, and the actual address identifies the recipient, where the envelope is going to be shipped to. As far as the server is concerned, this is the only part of the message that matters. USPS will deliver an empty envelope. They don't care what you're shipping as long as that actual package is set to be shipped correctly. So they may yell at you in line at USPS because they're a little grumpy over there. But after that, if your addresses are good and the envelope is appropriate, you paid enough postage, that envelope will get where you want it to go. You can think of the recipient as the address on an envelope and the sender as the return address. And in this case, I'm going to use a meetup email as my sender, and then my email, emily@kickbox.io, for the recipient. SMTP is such a human readable protocol that the commands are literally from, or mail from, an RCPT to, okay? Which really simplifies things, right? So let's dive into this just a little bit and look at some common SMTP commands. First, it's as simple as hello. This is going to start the conversation and identify the sender server. It's generally followed by its domain name. There's also an EHLO, and fittingly, it stands for extended kilo or hello. That's just letting the server know that the client wishes to use extended SMTP. Then there's auth. This is how the client is going to authenticate with the server. So if you're connecting to Gmail, you would authenticate with your Gmail username and password. In this case, auth uses base64 encoding. And what this looks like is basically if you say, you know, hello Google, you type in auth login, that 334, and that gobbledygook right there, the VX, that is simply username encoded base64. So then you're going to encode your username, pass it back. It's going to ask for your password. You'll put your password in, encoded. And then if everything goes well and there's no extra layers of security or anything, you're going to get something like a 235 authentication successful. I do want to note for the technical folks in the audience that SMTP response codes, like 250 and 235, are different from HTTP response codes, but they follow a lot of the same logic and patterns that you'd expect. So 200 is always going to be like, things went well in some way. Mail from, this is going to begin the operation, right? So after you authenticate, mail from will actually start the email transfer. You're letting the server know, okay, I'm going to send an email. This is my email address. This is where I'm going to send the email from. Then you've got this command to let them know what the recipient is going to be. You're going to identify each one. So it's repeated for each address. You can't kind of shove them all in using commas or whatever. You have to enter them in repeatedly. Size, if you want to use this, informs the remote server about the estimated size. This is measured in bytes. And then you've got verify, which just asks the server to verify whether a particular email address exists. And so when you have a company like Kickbox who verifies emails, this is something certainly we use at like a very, very high level, but certainly there's a lot more that goes into actually verifying an email. This is not something I would recommend as being reliable overall. And then finally, quit. And you know, if you put your thinking hat on, it simply just means to terminate the conversation. You've done what you need to do, and you're going to disconnect from that server's connection. Okay, at a high level, that is what SMTP is and how it works. I want to give a few seconds for any kind of questions. Kevin, do we have any questions?
No, the chat is pretty quiet right now. I'm trying to get people to engage, but the cattle prod's not working very well.
Okay, cool. I hope they're not bored yet. All right, so we'll move on to the next section. Next, we're going to talk about message contents, how we package and transfer email over the internet. We do not use email carrier pigeons, thank God. I'm actually really excited about this little illustration here on the screen. His name is Flip. He's Kickbox's new mascot, so we're going to be announcing him formally here soon, but you guys get a sneak peek at his adorableness. So messages have headers, and just like every HTTP response or page we get back, this has headers, which is just like additional metadata, additional information to tell us about what's contained, right? You can think about this like official letterhead. So you've opened the envelope, and then there's still some extra information there that gives us a little bit more of a clue as to what's going on in the actual message. These headers are usually ignored by SMTP servers, and instead they're used a lot by email clients. So on the receiving end to sort of view things. A simple example of a message header would be subject, right? So it's just listed subject, reminder, whatever. You can think of message headers, like I said, as the official letterhead. It just contains a little bit extra information. And the difference is that humans don't end up seeing the letterhead as a whole single component when we're checking email. Instead, our email client, like Gmail, it grabs the information that it finds relevant or wants to show us, and then it allocates it where it's appropriate. So it will pull subject out of those message headers and then list it in the subject in this very nice user interface for us to interact with. Here's where it gets a little bit confusing. Just like an envelope has a to and a from, the headers also have a to and a from. The difference is that SMTP servers only route things based on that envelope. They don't look at the to and the from in the message headers at all. But this means that the header can be unreliable and can contain information suggesting that the email originates from someplace other than it really did, okay? So this is where you get like spammy emails, like that it looks like it's from the IRS and you're about to be arrested in 2 hours, and you put your pants a little bit. The reason they can do that is they simply put an email that looks like it's coming from the IRS in the header, but the actual origin of the email is not from there. It's from a spammer's email address. The fact that the envelope and the headers both have this to and from field is what actually allows blind carbon copy to exist. So what happens basically is the recipients are all provided in the envelope. They're all sent the email, but the BCC recipients are stripped from the headers so that no one else can tell that that email was sent to that person, which is pretty cool, I think. Just like we looked at some SMTP details, I want to look at some headers and just give you an idea of what it looks like. And then I'm going to show you how to find these yourself if you're curious. I find it super interesting. I pulled these headers from an email I received from Meetup, reminding me about a new DevOps meetup in Denver called Coffee Ops, which is pretty cool. And so I stripped away some of the headers. There's a lot in there. I just wanted to show you a few, kind of fit it all on one page. But like you can see the date at the very end. You definitely see the to and the from, the sender, the subject. So all that's pretty straightforward. Then you also have things like this MIME version, which is always 1.0. And basically this header lets the email client know that the email is going to involve things that are not just plain old vanilla ASCII. We're going to add things like HTML and allow the email to be, more interesting and pretty. There are several received headers. Each server that kind of helps an email on its way, that receives the email and then passes it along, leaves a little stamp on it. And the message then has a path that can be traced back through the servers. You can kind of think of this as like your stack trace and see where it was and who it was passed through. If you look at the header that starts with X, those are called X headers. This is not very complicated. And they're non-standard headers because some servers add to messages to extend functionality or add metadata. So I use Gmail. Gmail added this X header when it received the email. If you want to view headers of an email yourself, it's actually really easy. If you have a Gmail account, you just go in, check an email. When you have it open up, there's on the right, there's that arrow, that drop-down menu. You're going to click that and scroll down to View Original. The whole message is going to open up in a new tab with everything, and all the headers will be at the top. And there's a lot, so you'll have to scroll. But it's pretty cool to go and look and like see all the little pieces that make an email arrive to you, I think. So remember when I was talking about that MIME version from a few slides ago? It stands for Multi-Purpose Internet Mail Extensions. I'm not going to dive too far into this, but since SMTP is a protocol that is only concerned about the transport of the message, and we like our emails to do fancy things like contain binary data and HTML and other languages beyond ASCII, there must be some other kind of protocol that sits on top of it to describe those kinds of content. And in this case, that protocol is MIME. Though MIME was originally created for SMTP, it's also become widely used in other parts of the internet, like HTTP. And those areas and protocols actually needed to make sure that the data and encodings were consistent as well. So that's sort of how we package and transfer email. Are there any questions with that? I want to give you a second.
Actually, I got one question. So I don't know if you're going to touch on this, but he's asking in advance. It's from Jason. He wants to know if you're going to talk about DKIM for the uninitiated. He was having some trouble setting up his Office 365 to his private domain.
Oh, cool.
And he was curious if you were going to talk about that at all, or is that a topic for another time?
That is definitely a topic for another time. I'm not going to touch on that. But Jason, I am more than willing to kind of help you out as much as I can. So if you just shoot me a message on Twitter or whatever and find me, I will look into that for you, for sure.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And that's all we have.
Okay, cool. So now we're going to get into deliverability and reputation. And this is pretty interesting, right? So it can be summarized as, don't be a spammy schmuck. But email deliverability is really the overall likelihood that an email you send will be delivered. Deliverability depends on a bunch of factors. We'll talk about a few of them in a minute. Some of them are data validation, list hygiene, content, sender's reputation. There are so many factors that feed into this. Email content can broadly fall into two categories, right? So you have broadcast and transactional. Broadcast emails are sometimes referred to as marketing or promotional emails. And then you have transactional email, which is called triggered or relationship email. And understanding the difference between the two is really important, not only from a content perspective and reaching your customers in a much more fluid way, but also from a legal perspective and protecting yourself and your company from breaking laws and getting into trouble with some of these email service providers. So we just got in these new shoes, whatever it is. Typically, the emails are trying to elicit some kind of action from the user. So visit our website, read this thing, sign up for this, or buy something. These emails may contain personalized content, but they're still sent to a wide audience. So companies may segment their email list and allow for some individual marketing, but it's still going to be sent to a group of people. The other kind of email, transactional email, is much more personal, right? It's usually sent to a user based on a user's action. So I ordered groceries off of Instacart and I get an order confirmation, or I ordered a book off of Amazon and I'm going to get that shipping notification. So I caused something and then I was given an email in response to that action. It includes receipts, password resets, and things like I said, shipping notifications. So why do we care? Well, sending broadcast email is usually a lot more risky than sending a transactional email, because a larger number of emails are being sent. You just have more of a risk that some of those people are not going to want your email or not even realize that they should be receiving your email. And so that's where you get a lot more people possibly marking your emails as spam or complaining in some way. Most importantly, the type of email you send will determine which laws you need to follow. So broadcast emails must always comply with laws like CAN spam. And there's many more out there, but it's making sure that companies don't just plaster messages to people unwanted. So make sure you're following those laws. Transactional emails are usually exempt from those because it is a one-on-one kind of conversation. Deliverability is the overall measure of how much email from a given sender makes it to the recipient's inbox. There's no standardized measure for this, and there's no email reputation authority. So it's sort of tracked loosely by a bunch of different people, and some of those people share their thoughts about you. And you can think about this like your reputation in your community, right? If you go to a party, some people are gonna like you, some people aren't gonna like you. Everyone has their opinion about your reputation, and occasionally they share that with each other, okay? The same thing happens when we're using the internet, and specifically in this case with email. The servers we interact with take note of our actions, keep track of that, and occasionally share that reputation with other servers and people. So an email sender's reputation, it's based on your IP address and domain. These are tracked across the internet, right? Some of the deliverability factors can be affected or directly controlled by the sender, and others are a lot more indirect to sort of manage. But basically, large inbox providers like Google and Yahoo put a lot of work into making sure that their users don't receive unwanted or malicious email. This is why, you know, our spam folders fill up with all sorts of junk without us even doing anything. They do a really good job of filtering, and that's how they do it, right? They watch everyone's behavior. The patterns they establish are used by many systems to associate reputation with sending domains and IPs. A low reputation means that your emails will likely be labeled as spam, filtered, or they could be blocked entirely. So there's a bunch of different factors that lead to an email reputation. But responding to email or responding to reputation threats can mean paying attention to some of these different feedback loops in order to identify and resolve problems. So some of the factors that are involved is sending volume and consistency. So how much email are you sending and at what frequency, right? When you have someone who's spamming, typically you won't see any emails sent, and then suddenly one day, 20,000 emails are sent. And that's the kind of pattern and spike that they're watching for. Much better to be consistent with your email. Spam reports and abuse complaints. So these are people who, for whatever reason, are marking your email as spam. And this is one of the reasons that it's really important to have an easy way to unsubscribe from emails. Going back to those message headers, there's actually an unsubscribe tag that you can throw in there. That's what allows Gmail to just have that unsubscribe link at the top of an email. It just clicks that, follows the header back to make sure that you're unsubscribed from that list. So you want to make sure that's easy so you're not marked as spam. Spam trap hits. This is something that I had no idea about before I started at Kickbox. But basically, email providers, they send out, or they sort of like leave these honeypots with email addresses on them. And it's called a spam trap. And one of the worst things you can do is send email to a spam trap. The addresses are never published on legitimate channels, but they're intentionally put in places where bots can find them. And if you're scraping email addresses off the internet, you will likely grab them there. But typically, people won't find these email addresses. So if you send an email to a spam trap, it indicates that you're up to no good. This can certainly happen by accident, a typo, and you accidentally hit one, but that's rare. And if you end up hitting one, you could be suspended or flagged for review, and that will be a pain to deal with. So you want to make sure that the email addresses you're sending email to are legit. This is something where opt-in confirmations can help a lot because you're double checking before you actually send an email. There are blacklists and what's called RBLs, or real-time black hole lists. RBLs are lists of IP addresses and senders that determine if an IP address is sending email that could be considered spam. And a blacklist is a real-time database that determines whether an IP address is sending email that could be considered spam. And finally, there's engagement, right? Not the diamond ring kind, but just making sure that the people you're sending email to want to receive your emails. This is where sometimes you'll see companies send an email that says something like, we haven't heard from you in 6 months, or you haven't opened an email in 3 months. Would you still like to receive emails from us? And this is what they're doing. They're making sure that their reputation is high, that the senders they're sending, or the consumers they're sending to actually want to receive their email, and they're making sure that their engagement is solid. You can actually find out if you've been listed on a blacklist. These are some of the big blacklist houses, if you will. Spam House is obviously a huge one. If your email service doesn't provide alerts when your IP is listed, you may have to actually go manually check. But you can definitely go look at any of these DNS blacklists and check it out. Typically, a blacklist functions like this. This is actually a diagram very similar to one Spam House had published. And basically what happens is it just filters through the blacklist. So it says where you want to send it. It's asking, are you a blacklisted sender? Then it goes through a policy filter, right? And the email is then either rejected, accepted, and sent on to the mailbox, or tagged and filtered in some other way. IP address reputation is important. Every email is associated with an originating IP address. And if you remember back, Internet Protocol. So over time, monitoring the number of reported spam emails and complaints associated with emails from common IP addresses, the receiving servers assign reputation to them, to each of these addresses. And they have a big impact on deliverability, including how long it takes a message to show up in a recipient's inbox after you send it. Not all senders have high volume, right? So, or not high enough to make a dedicated IP address valuable. And in this cases, it may actually hurt their overall deliverability to have a dedicated IP address because they just don't have that reputation yet. In those cases, a shared IP address is really useful. And so this is where email sent from Yahoo or Gmail, a shared IP address can be a bit of a double-edged sword depending on the circumstances. For new senders with no existing reputation, it's actually a really good thing because you can kind of sit on the reputation of others. But it means that if a sender is shared on that shared IP address is acting or sending bad email, then you can have a lot of spam reports and complaints. And so to mitigate this, email service providers typically have several tiers of shared IP addresses for senders with different reputations. So they kind of deal with it on themselves. And then finally, there's something called dedicated IP addresses. Basically, if you're a high volume sender or someone who sends more than 25,000 emails a day, so this is not a lot of people, this is like banks, credit cards, large corporations like Nordstrom's or Macy's, they could be a high volume sender, but this is not your typical situation. And basically, You're going to need an IP warm-up. So just like NASCAR has a couple warm-up laps to warm up your tires, your reputation coming out the gate is pretty cold. So you're going to have to warm up to it. And when an IP has no reputation, the traffic is treated very cautiously, right? And it's actually batched. So you'll send just a little bit the email service provider will send just a little bit at a time to make sure that sorry, I'm on the wrong thing. There you go. To make sure that you are a legitimate user and you're not doing anything malicious. It's a good idea to separate your broadcast emails from your transactional emails. And that's simply to make sure that, if you happen to have a marketing department that gets a little overzealous and you have a campaign that causes a lot of spam alerts, that anything that happens in those broadcast emails will not affect your actual core business through those transactional emails. People get very upset when they can't figure out things like their order confirmations or shipping notifications. So it's important to separate those two to make sure they get their important information. And then lastly, I'm just going to touch on domain reputation before we close out here. Senders can switch to a new IP address to reset their IP reputation, which is a little disturbing, and I'm disturbed at how many people do this. It's pretty shady. But with the internet slowly trudging toward IP version 6, greatly increasing the supply of IPs, another way to track reputation is through domains, right? So it's how senders are tracked independently of IP. That means that broadcast emails from a different IP address can still affect the transactional emails and their impact of deliverability because it's coming from the same domain. So I know that was relatively quick, but that was kind of the summary of deliverability and reputation and email as a whole. Happy to answer any questions in the last couple minutes we have here.
I'll give folks some moments. So I'll tell everyone from personal experience, there's a lot of really good marketing tricks for getting around spam filters and raising domain reputation and that sort of thing. I know, like one of the things I do with my mailing list or the SwiftKick mailing list is anyone who's a new attendee who's never attended one of our shows before, here in about an hour or so, you're going to get an email from me. It's just going to be a very nice, hey, how you doing? Welcome to the list. But by opening that email, you've raised my reputation. So, as long as you don't hit spam, you're not going to do that because you're all nice people. Don't hit spam on my emails. But yeah, usually that initial email, while it's fresh in someone's mind, it's like, oh yeah, I signed up for that thing. I'll click on that email, and it helps reputation. I had a client once they got domain banned by AOL. They got blacklisted, and they're not sending spam email. They're sending it's all transactional emails. And we were watching, and it's like, oh, banned, and people from AOL said we're not getting any of the mail. It's like, first, why are you on AOL? Two, let's see what we can do to fix this. And a lot of the large providers, they really don't want to give you information about why. And it took about 2 or 3 weeks, but we asked them very nicely, hey, can you reconsider your policy? And eventually they let us back in. But a lot of things we found, like we were sending email that, this is the project that I inherited, but we were sending email that was marked as it's HTML, but it didn't have HTML in it. It was plain text. And the only HTML in it was a hyperlink that went back to our site. So the domains matched. But because it was HTML email, but it wasn't large enough to look like a legitimate HTML email, that was throwing off some spam filters. Crazy. So if you're going to send plain text email, send plain text email. If you're going to send HTML email, actually generate HTML. Don't just say, oh, we're HTML, here's a hyperlink. That's a key way to get into spam filters. You know, hashtag learned the hard way.
And I will say, like, you don't have to do any of these hard things yourself. Like, email service providers have done they provide all of it for you. And then there are services like Kickbox and others that will help you kind of keep your list clean. So you don't have to mess around with any of this if you don't want to. I can't believe something that small triggered that.
And when but we were sending like 10,000 emails a day, transactional emails, and it was enough to kick off a couple of these filters. I have like lots of really good just dealing with email stories. Yeah. I remember we signed up for a service and they were trying to offer us the dedicated IP address, and I almost flipped that switch to get a dedicated IP address for our client. And I'm really glad I didn't, because is what you discussed is that you have to warm up the IP address.
Yeah.
And we weren't sending enough email to warrant having our own dedicated IP. So we were much better off using the shared IP from the service providers.
Awesome.
It's why you don't roll your own at all. And I don't know how many clients I've walked into where all their email is going through Gmail SMTP servers. They're not using an email delivery provider of some sort. If you're sending more than, I don't remember what my number was. If you're sending more than one email a day, don't use Gmail for your email delivery. I've learned this lesson the hard way too many times. It's really easy to get like perma-banned by email providers. Awesome. Well, I don't see any other chat messages coming through, so we'll go ahead and call it there.
All right.
And everyone will gather some resources from Emily, and we'll send them out to everyone. But with that, thank you, Emily, so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. And don't forget Revolution Conf, May 17th and 18th. If you'd like to see Emily live and in person. Emily, do you have any other events coming up in the meantime?
I do. Next month, I will be in Charlotte at DevOps Days Charlotte. So I think that's February 22nd, 23rd. Don't quote me on that. But I'm really excited about that. The lineup looks really, really good.
Awesome.
Yeah. And you can find me on Twitter at Editing Emily. So.
Alrighty. So your video was blocking your Twitter address, so I dropped it in the chat for everyone.
Thank you.
So go follow Emily. But with that, thank you, Emily, again so much. Thank you, folks out there, for watching. And if you're watching this afterwards and it's not live, thank you for watching the replay.
Yeah.
Greatly appreciate it. And everyone, enjoy your day.
Thanks, Kevin.